Good afternoon, friends, and thank you for joining the North Carolina Council of Churches for the third in our series of information on our immigrant neighbors and preparing while we wait. We're glad to have with us today Caleb Kieffer, who comes from the Southern Poverty Law Center. In particular, his specialty is as an analyst with the Intelligence Project, and he focuses, fortunately for us, on anti-immigration extremism. So we're excited, Caleb, to hear what you have to offer. I want to remind everybody that if you missed the first two sessions, they are archived on the council's website, and you can go back and look at those. And then I'll forecast for you at the end of our meeting what we hope to do next week, fourth week of Advent, last in our series as we prepare for the new year and get ready to really buckle up and get going. But for now, Caleb, let me turn it over to you so you can tell us more that we need to know about how to stand with our immigrant neighbors. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just share my screen real fast for folks so they could see my slide deck I have prepared. So yes, thank you so much. Really great to be here with everyone today. And I think this is a timely conversation, especially in the moment that we all find ourselves in. As mentioned, yeah, I'm with the Southern Poverty Law Center. Southern Poverty Law Center is a catalyst for racial justice in the South and beyond. We do a lot of work around civil rights and human rights, but one of the components that we do, and it's kind of my line of work with the organization, is tracking, monitoring, exposing organized hate and extremism in the United States. So as you see here, one of the things that we do this in various ways. We have a lot of publications, reports that we kind of produce every year, but kind of one of our bread and butter reports that we put out every year is our annual Year in Hate and Extremism report in the United States. So this is kind of like it shows a footprint of kind of organized hate and extremism in the United States. So a lot of the groups that we look at, they demonize and vilify people based on their immutable characteristics. They're very engaged in anti-rights campaigns. Some of the groups engage in anti-government conspiracy theories. And so we know that's kind of the hard right and kind of anti-inclusion movements. There's a lot of kind of tentacles and nodes that go into this kind of space and in this ecosystem. But this map that we produce every year it's one of the longest running surveys and studies of organized hate and extremism in the United States, and kind of shows how this kind of these groups are operating and organizing within the country. So this is more focused on the organized groups themselves. So while hate crime reporting and tracking is very important to us, we're also very much interested in kind of who the groups are driving hate and extremism, who the groups are kind of creating this ideology where kind of these anti-government and extremist ideas are being incubated. So we're really interested in kind of the groups and organized effort about this. Of course, then from there you have stemming from this ideology, from this rhetoric that's put out, that's kind of swirling all around the country. Then you have instances where maybe someone who might be prone to violence might take that one step further and it might step into the hate crime realm. But again, we're just really focused mainly on a lot of these kind of organizers of these groups in the United States. And so kind of from there, one of the ideologies that we look at, and that is kind of my kind of rhetoric that I look at, is anti-hate groups operating in the country. So in 2023, we documented 18 groups operating in the country. So actually, our report is released after each full calendar year. So the 2024 numbers will be released in February. A lot of these groups that we look at kind of have their own niche kind of roles that they play in this kind of broader anti-immigrant network. So one group that we look at is the Federation for American Immigration Reform. They're based out of Washington, D.C. They're very much kind of focused on peddling anti-immigrant the agenda, anti-immigrant legislation. They want to kind of court sympathetic lawmakers. They want to court local law enforcement, like sheriffs. You also have other groups like the Center for Immigration Studies, which is kind of an anti-immigrant think tank that kind of creates these kind of biased reports to kind of give cover to anti-immigrant organizing. You also have the Immigration Reform Law Institute, which kind of gives legal cover to this rhetoric. And then you also have kind of state and more other focus groups. There is a group that we look at in North Carolina called NC Fire, North Carolinians for Immigration Enforcement, which kind of work to kind of push anti-immigrant rhetoric at the local level. And then there's a group like the Border News Network that kind of operates at the border to try to do this like citizen journalist stuff of videotaping migrants at the border and for kind of weird and nefarious purposes. So a lot of this rhetoric is all, or I'm sorry, a lot of this data and information is all available on our website. So if you go to the SPLC website, splcenter.org, you can just go to the hate map and then you can pull up the map and kind of subsequent and additional resources to look at kind of what that is. It's very kind of interactive. You can read more about the groups and everything, but just kind of give you a flavor for it. And I will say that a lot of these groups that we look at in the anti-immigrant network are traced back to the man on your screen here, that by the man in the name of John Tanton. So Tanton was a Michigan eye doctor who kind of started in the environmental and sustainable worldview, and then from there kind of was kind of radicalized further into radical population control and from there really went into full anti-immigrant and white nationalist ideology, and Tanton very much kind of this quote that he has here, he said that I've come to a point that that for European American society to exist, it requires a European American majority, which of course means white. So he very much was steeped in this kind of white nationalist, white supremacist thinking, and he kind of set forward this network of groups to show this. And so yeah, he worked to kind of found or fund this network that exists. And actually, Tanton died in 2019, but kind of the network of groups that he set up continues to exist in this day. And these groups that we look at, they try to operate under this this veneer of legitimacy. They want to, yeah, kind of be in the Beltway. They want to be close to state lawmakers. But kind of a lot of their rhetoric and ideology kind of goes back to this, an anti-immigrant agenda really goes back into this line of thinking of this kind of fears around changing demographics in society, and of course then halting immigration and refugees and supporting kind of mass deportations and other anti-rights rhetoric in the name of kind of preserving this white kind of supremacist nation, and that's kind of been the underlining goal for them. So the leadership has changed. Tanton's no longer in the picture, but these groups very much kind of work to uphold his legacy. So just going along, so to kind of give an overview of some of the anti-immigrant activity that we saw in 2024, really this was a banner year for seeing anti-immigrant rhetoric. I mean, I'm sure I don't need to tell you. I'm sure you all are very well aware of this, but we saw kind of dangerous and dehumanizing rhetoric, such as claiming there of being a migrant invasion happening at the U.S. southern border. A lot of this rhetoric very much plays into this idea, this racist conspiracy theory called the Great Replacement, which is prominent in a lot of extremists and anti-immigrant circles. And it's this idea that white people are being replaced in Western nations, including the United States. And so according to stave this off, we need to halt immigration. We need to implement these kind of draconian policies in the United States in hopes of kind of reversing this. And so, yeah, I think that when we see this kind of invasion rhetoric, this idea that that the country is being invaded by mostly migrants coming from Central and South America and other parts of the world, really fits in this idea that that this needs to be met with kind of uh, almost yeah, equally dehumanizing policies, and if not right, and if not alt-right or outright violence in some cases. But we've seen a lot of that rhetoric being really charged, and what we saw then too is so much of this rhetoric used to be kind of more kind of in the on the fringes and associated with these groups. But what we're seeing now, and we really saw throughout this year, is this rhetoric being dragged into the mainstream. And so, of course, then you saw, I don't remember if you all remember in earlier this year in like February and in January, you saw these anti-immigrant convoys kind of starting up. So groups and kind of anti-immigrant folks who were energized by kind of this invasion rhetoric started organizing across state lines to travel to Eagle Pass, Texas, to support Governor Abbott in his standoff with the federal government over putting razor wire barriers up and kind of working to set up this kind of dehumanizing kind of border fence in the region. So we saw this convoy of groups traveling across state lines to support this standoff. And what we saw was kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric being a through line with some of these hard right and extremist figures that joined the convoy, and really showed that kind of anti-immigrant sentiment is a driving force and is really kind of the glue connecting a lot of these far right hate and extremist groups in the country. And of course, then we saw earlier this year, or I'm sorry, a few months ago, the fear mongering around the Haitian community in Ohio, really just gross rhetoric that went all the way up to the um, presidential debate. But a lot of this kind of anti-Haitian rhetoric, again, was very much came out of extremists, kind of online circles, and made that jump from yeah, these like kind of fringe online circles to yeah, all the way to a presidential debate, to it being an actual like conversation in the kind of national landscape around the election. So, and we also saw this kind of rhetoric then too making its way to other parts in the country as well. So there were states and there were cities and towns in Alabama that a lot of these groups were also fear mongering around the Haitian community. And again, this fits into a lot of this rhetoric that we've seen. A lot of extremist groups have very much always kind of tried to demonize and vilify the Haitian community, but kind of and really were energized by some of this stuff, really making this jump to the mainstream. And of course, then we saw groups really kind of helping to drive policy then too. So of course, then we saw the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was impeached over his handling of the border. And of course, then too, what thing was really kind of interesting about that was a lot of these hate groups that we look at, these anti-immigrant groups that I mentioned, they're kind of yeah, operating in the Beltway, helped drive this impeachment. But I think what's important to say is that we can have differences about what we think kind of immigration policy can look like in this country, what we can yeah have kind of respectful debate about what that looked at. This impeachment was never going to be about that. It was never going to be about respectfully having this conversation. It was going to be about how can we turn this into an anti-immigrant spectacle? How can we make this all about pulling, yeah, in this this kind of invasion rhetoric, and broadcasting it to a widespread audience and a widespread people in the country. So again, it was never about this rhetoric. It was always about how can we yeah, further blast this anti-immigrant rhetoric, this xenophobic rhetoric from a larger kind of microphone. And so with that in mind, then too, we also saw anti-immigrant narratives show up in the election cycle as well. So the SPLC Action Fund actually recorded and documented how extremist narratives that, again, were once kind of very much only prevalent in extremist circles are now being used in official mainstream politics and electoral campaigns. So this was actually the third iteration of this project that we looked at and that we did. And kind of what we saw was the first two, we really just tracked candidates who they themselves were either tied to extremist groups or members of them running for office, and they were kind of more like long shot candidates. It was a good chance that they probably would have never gotten even out of the primary stage. But what we kind of saw in these kind of first two, excuse me, iterations was yeah, these kind of groups that really had explicit ties to these extremist groups that we look at. And by this kind of latest election cycle, what we saw was candidates who maybe they themselves were not always extreme, or they themselves might not be considered extremists in nature. And maybe even you might say that they're more like middle of the road, more central leaning candidates running and using the same exact rhetoric that that we associate with hate and extremist groups that we look at. So we saw a lot of this kind of anti-LGBTQ fear mongering. We saw a lot of this fear mongering around inclusive education, fear mongering around DEI, around uh, other kind of inclusive education. And we also then, of course, saw really this anti-immigrant rhetoric too being really supercharged with some of these candidates. So again, this invasion rhetoric, this idea that the U.S. Mexican border is being flooded with immigrants and migrants, really just a lot of this kind of great replacement style thinking showing up in these electoral candidates and being kind of laundered through these electoral campaigns. So we actually tracked 136 candidates and 108 official um, uh, rhetoric from official campaign sites and saw this being used. And also then too, so again, it was not only the hardliners using it, but pretty much like a wide spread of candidates. And it spanned then too. So it spanned all the way from city council races to school board races to state candidates to candidates running for or U.S. Senate or the U.S. House, all the way then to the presidential and vice presidential election. And of course, then with the kind of anti-Haitian rhetoric really showing up in a big way this year. So it was one thing that we really looked at for this. Another thing then too was we've really been watching this kind of forces of exclusion kind of coming together. So this kind of meeting of historically anti-LGBTQ plus hate groups that we track really stepping in and stepping up their own anti-immigrant rhetorics, whereas opposed they might maybe stay in their lane previously and only like kind of push their kind of bread and butter anti-LGBTQ and rhetoric, and they really stepped into this well. So one of the groups that we looked at was the Family Research Council, and we documented that their publication, the Washington Stand, published over the year 170 articles on immigration. And what we saw was they also were peddling some of this rhetoric too in their kind of news and analysis that was in this kind of publication cycle. And we saw some of this great replacement style thinking and some of these ideas that were really are used in kind of anti-immigrant and kind of more hardcore white nationalist circles being used in their publications. So we saw this claims of this situation at the border of migrants seeking asylum as being manufactured, and this is a way to kind of import a new voting bloc that's loyal to liberals and to the Democratic Party, um, which it's been a huge kind of idea and driver in kind of great replacement style thinking that yeah, that this is part of a like large plan to import this new voting bloc, to import this new group of people coming from mostly non-white people coming from Central and South America that will be loyal to the Democrats, that will change the electorate, that will forever kind of vote in the way of liberal leaning and candidates and the Democratic Party. And also then too, what we saw was in this rhetoric was a lot of these groups then too pushing this idea of non-citizens voting as well. So they really worked to kind of lay this groundwork then too, that even if kind of the election may not had went their way, a lot of these groups were very much in the pro Trump camp and pro kind of more far right hardliner candidate cycle, that you had them laying this non-citizen voting conspiracy theories that we of course know that this data point is so small and it's not even enough to sway an actual election, but we still saw them laying the groundwork, fear mongering that the non-citizens voting. And also too, I think that then this further sets up and puts in place these policies of these further draconian policies of mass deportations, of going after undocumented and refugee populations in this country, saying that yeah, that all these undocumented immigrants are voting, are changing the electorate, are swaying elections, and thus need to be kind of dealt with. So I think that a lot of this was very much meant to lay that groundwork to support draconian policies that I think we can expect coming in the new administration. So that said, to kind of shift to this kind of post-election landscape as well. So we saw a lot of the anti-immigrant groups that I mentioned earlier in my remarks really energized by the election results, that Trump would be having a second term, because what we saw was a lot of these groups like the Center for Immigration Policy, uh, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, some of these anti-immigrant groups that we look at were co-authors for things like Project 2025, who were the ones who were trying to really push the envelope and put a lot of these anti-immigrant ideas in a document like Project 2025. We saw them also really um, again, yeah, like hope that we'll see some of these policies, anti-immigrant policies, be actualized in the coming administration then too. So of course we know that there's of course threats of mass deportations. There's threats of a renewed Muslim ban. There's threats of repealing birthright citizenship guaranteed under the 14th Amendment. There's Trump on the campaign trail mentioned this idea of remigration, which is something that's a little more popular among the European far right, that kind of suggests that that migrants and immigrants are incompatible with Western society, and thus should go back to their own countries, and if not willingly, that they could be kind of stripped of their kind of authorization. And so yeah, we saw a lot of these anti-immigrant hate groups being really energized by these policies. Of course, then yeah, one of the groups that I mentioned, Federation for American Immigration Reform, were energized by the thought of mass deportations, and really came out saying that like we need to have workplace raids happen. And repealing birthright citizenship then too is something that was floated in the first Trump administration. They were never quite able to do it. It requires more than just an executive action that requires actually changing the Constitution. But this is something that has been so popular and prevalent within extremist circles. This has kind of been a long goal of theirs on their wish list for decades. And so the fact that it's even being kind of talked about as a real policy proposal is very concerning and worrying. I also say then too, we saw extremist type figures, of course, being then tapped to serve in the incoming administration. So Stephen Miller, of course, who was the architect behind so many anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim policies under the first Trump administration, is slated to come back. Of course, then we saw Tom Homan, who was previously the ICE uh, chief under the first Trump administration, and he kind of spent the Biden years associating with anti-Muslim groups and anti-hate groups, being tapped to serve as border czar, and he's been just really making the rounds within conservative media, kind of hyping these mass deportations. And he was, of course, one of the chief architects behind the family separation policy that we saw under the previous administration. So, of course, we're kind of starting to worry about some of these, more kind of extremist side figures beginning to come back into the administration then too. And also, I will say what we saw during the last Trump administration as well was a lot of these anti-immigrant hate groups were they were consulted for policy to help kind of shape policy and legislation. And also then too, we saw actual members who were part of these groups ascend into positions within the U.S. federal government that were immigration related or immigration adjacent, so they could kind of take their ideology and kind of help kind of frame it within the actual federal government. So we saw that happen. We kind of saw them leave during the Biden administration because it didn't quite align with their values. But of course, then we're of course tracking to see if this will kind of happen again in the incoming administration. So kind of a lot to keep our eye on in the kind of coming administration. And I know that's these presentations is kind of like the oppositional work that we do at the Southern Poverty Law Centers. It's kind of hard because it's like you throw a lot of kind of like bad stuff and at folks. So I kind of always like to kind of leave on a more positive kind of I guess ending. And I will say that one question that I usually get and that a lot of my colleagues usually get is like, what can be done? What can we do? And there is stuff to be done, but unfortunately, there isn't quite the magic wand. There isn't just kind of a one quick fix that we can do to fix everything. I think if we could, that I wouldn't be doing this work and I wouldn't be in the position that I have. But I think that within our department, we've been really working with this block and build framework. So yeah, there's kind of a lot of blocking that we need to do from these extremist groups, from these kind of hardliners. Coming to administration, but then there's also this building that we need to do too. So I mean, yeah, there's the firefighting, and then there's the tree building or tree planting, as I also kind of say. So I mean, one thing that I think we need to do that SPLC will continue to do is really just continue to expose these anti-immigrant hate groups in the country and their agenda, shine a light on how these groups kind of help craft some of these policies that were maybe expected to see actualize, like the draconian policies that we saw in Project 2025. Also then too, just shine on the light on kind of how or where these anti-immigrant policies are coming from then too. So kind of one thing that I kind of, when I talk to media and other kind of policymakers and other stakeholders in this work is a lot of these policies don't come out of thin air. They've actually been incubated and kind of nurtured in these extremist circles for decades. So thinking back, of course, to the birthright citizenship example, that's been a long time policy goal of these these groups. And again, it was like it's almost been like a long game for them of waiting to get a friendly lawmaker, friendly kind of presidential candidate to help push these and drive these policies. Um, and then one thing I also say then too, one of the themes that we kind of saw was with exposing extremism in elections data, in how we kind of are seeing this anti-immigrant invasion rhetoric being dragged into the mainstream or being used by mainstream politicians, are actually showing up in official hearings on Capitol Hill and everything, which is super concerning. And I think there's a real effort to kind of drag this stuff into the mainstream. But just because it's in the mainstream does not mean that it has to be normalized. Does not mean that we have to let it go kind of unchallenged and unchecked. And I think it's up to us in kind of our everyday roles to yeah, challenge this rhetoric and push back against it when we do see it. And then one thing I will say then too is some of these anti-immigrant hate groups then too, they really want to court sympathetic local law enforcement, particularly in the sheriffs, to implement things like 287G programs, which kind of deputizes local law enforcement to serve as an extension of the deportation machine associated with ICE. So kind of what SPLC has come out and said was that we do not need local law enforcement operating as immigration agents. That just makes everything way too messy. It's the immigration falls in the federal government, and we oppose these measures like 287G, but also then too, these are programs, or these are policies that are upheld and pushed by anti-immigrant hate groups to again like uphold things like Tanton's legacy to make it life miserable for undocumented immigrants and migrants in this country, to kind of lay the groundwork for mass deportations, to kind of put policies in place that will uphold kind of white nationalism in this country. So we very much kind of work to call out these programs and things like it. And I will say that there's a group that is the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, who actually has a great map and a bunch of toolkits around some of these 287G measures and where they are in the country and a specific county, and kind of ways you can kind of respond to them. So, I mean, a lot of kind of blocking we need to do, kind of moving to that second column then too. There's also building that we have to do as well. So, I mean, I think we need to expand and strengthen coalitions. So, of course, then, as I mentioned, with the convoys that we saw earlier this year, is anti-immigrant rhetoric is a through line for a lot of these hard right, a lot of these far right groups. So I think those of us in working in civil rights, working in the human rights space, just need to expand and strengthen our own coalitions as well. So I mean, I think one thing is working in the interfaith space is always super helpful. As mentioned then too, a lot of these anti-LGBTQ plus groups are also stepping into the um, immigration space as well. So I think just making sure that we're bolstering our allies in the LGBTQ space is one thing that we've also always worked towards doing. I think then too, also just really building and bolstering political will to respond to anti-immigrant narratives and attacks. So I mean, as mentioned, we saw just in this election cycle just so much anti-immigrant rhetoric swirling around. And I think that's so important for us to contact our lawmakers, to contact our elected officials, and really say that we need to have opposition to these ideas. We need to push back against it. We need to even call our lawmakers who might even be pushing this rhetoric and say that these kind of great replacement style ideas have no place in our political system, in our political debate, in legislating and making policy in this country. So I mean, it's so crucial for us to kind of yeah be in our our elected officials' ears and telling them to push back against it, and that they themselves should not be using this type of rhetoric. Also, then too, I think that one thing with strengthening coalitions then too is I think we need to sometimes look to the business leaders in the community as well. We need to look to chambers of Congress, just because we know how much of a positive impact that immigrants have in this economy in our local communities. So just making sure that I think that we've actually found that the business leaders can be a good kind of ally in this space then too, as to step in and push back against hateful rhetoric and draconian policies, and just kind of another ally in this, in bolstering this kind of fight to preserve immigrant rights. Also then too, I will say that we need to further support immigration legal and direct services. There's a lot of, I'm sure, groups in so many areas doing so much great work, and that I think they're going to need our resources. I think they're going to need our time, and anything that we can kind of help with them going forward as they kind of gear up for this challenging work ahead. And also then too, I will say that there's one thing that we also need to really build resilience to extremism as well. So actually, the Southern Poverty Law Center has partnered with the Peril program at American University to create a caregiver's guide to online radicalization. So what this is kind of, it's a guide for parents and caregivers and teachers to kind of address radicalization among extremism among young people, especially as they're spending so much time online these days. And kind of what we see is a lot of these kids might be online, kind of be I got exposed to extremist narratives and sometimes go up down this pathway of radicalization. Kind of a lot of these websites that we have, the algorithms are set up to where they will drag you down and yeah, kind of in this kind of further extremist rabbit hole. So we kind of partnered with American University to make this guide for parents and caregivers and educators to identify these signs early on in young people's lives, and kind of offer a pathway away from going down these paths. And because when you kind of capture it at a more younger age, they're more likely to kind of be steeped and kind of lost to these extremist ideas and narratives. So really just stepping in and kind of providing a different way and kind of off ramp for young people, I think is just super important. And of course, I will include that resource in the notes. I think that will go out after this presentation if folks want to do reading or if they want to share in their respective networks. So again, so much I think that we can just kind of do, and I think that we are really going to have a lot of challenges going forward in the year to come. But I really think that just like we need to step up. There's blocking that we need to do, but then there's also a lot of just this building work, this tree planting work that we need to do as well. So with that, that's actually the end of my prepared remarks. So I'm happy to take any questions from the audience.
Thank you, Caleb. Wow, that is so much information and so important, I think, for folks to realize. I want to make another connection that you alluded to, but we didn't call it out, and that's the connection between this anti-immigration rhetoric and some of the Christian nationalist rhetoric that the council spent so much time talking about leading up to the election. And certainly the Family Research Council that you mentioned is right in the center of all that Christian nationalist work. So I don't know if you had anything you want to add to that piece of it, and how we might see that stuff starting to manifest itself in our own faith communities. I've always said that people are duped, oftentimes are duped by the rhetoric of Christian nationalism because it sounds Christian until you start to scratch beneath the surface, and then you find out actually it's it's not. Anyway, thoughts, do you have any thoughts about that, Caleb?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing that's well, it's interesting because even something like the Family Research Council, I think even what we saw probably even 2015, maybe 5 to 7 years ago, was Family Research Council were really kind of at the center of pushing Islamophobia and this anti-Muslim rhetoric when that was a little more um, kind of an issue that a lot of these kind of hard right groups were glomming onto. And so it's interesting now then too that they're kind of opportunistically now pushing anti-immigrant rhetoric. So I think that really just naming that these groups are um, they want to exclude others. This isn't about kind of meeting folks where they're at. This is about creating this exclusion and really upholding a country and these kind of traditional values that don't include a lot of people and that don't include Muslims, that don't include undocumented immigrants, that don't include LGBTQ people. So I think that's important. And then also then too, I will say that I mean, Project 2025, which is such a eye-opening document of these groups coming together to create this mandate for leadership for an incoming presidential administration, that so many ideas associated with Christian nationalism were in there. And yeah, there were so many just like co-authors that came from different extremist ideologies and hateful ideologies that the SPLC came together to produce this document. So I think that really noticing that I mean, I think this is a pretty sprawling wish list, Project 2025, but even if they start to produce some of it, I think it's going to be very worrying.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And then, from there, well, a question that was posed earlier in the chat is suggestions for how to counter some of this negative rhetoric if we find ourselves in conversations with people, maybe casual conversations, maybe social settings, maybe it comes up at church because people have been duped by Christian nationalism. I know it would depend a great deal on, what the negative comment was as far as crafting a response. But the question that was posed is if you have any suggestions for how we can, you said block and build. So if we, it's like when I was a kid, if people told a racist joke, um, well, people still tell racist jokes, sadly, but we would always stand up and say, I don't want to hear that kind of joke. And it would create a lot of conflict sometimes in circles where I was as a kid. Anyway, all that by way of example of saying, do you have any ideas for us when we find ourselves with an opportunity to speak up and speak out?
Yeah, so I think really just I think it's important to kind of inoculate ourselves and identify where these kind of what these anti-immigrant myths are then too, but I also then think it's really important to say like, yeah, that like immigrants are our neighbors, are part of our community, and really note that yeah, that immigrants are so much interwoven into the fabric of this country, and I think that yeah, just also just I think it's important to kind of lean in sometimes then too, and just like say like, well, why do you think this, or where did you kind of hear this rhetoric? I mean, that we know like a lot of these anti-immigrant narratives are just like projected on news and everything, and even just like maybe interrogate it and lean in and be like, well, where'd you get this? And then sometimes when even someone then tries to kind of go back and justify things, they themselves might not even quite understand where they got this data. So I think sometimes it's just like asking tough questions is why they do that, why they think this, and then I think you can kind of step in and challenge it a bit and be like, oh well, like I would come back with this data as well. And then, no, then too, there's also a lot of great like organizations out there, like the American Immigration Council, which just has so many great um, resources out there about immigrants and immigration in this country. So you can kind of share stuff and say like really show that how immigrants are just such a kind of crucial fabric in our country.
Thank you. I think one of the really helpful things I've heard in the last few weeks, and I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, is how much the immigrant community contributes to the tax base in our states and in our country, because they do pay income taxes on these salaries that they earn, and often pay into the Social Security and Medicare network, from which they will never benefit. And that sometimes stops people in their tracks when they realize that, you know, there's for whatever reason, there's money at stake, always stops people in their tracks. But I have heard that that's a very useful thing. There are two questions in the chat, Caleb, and I could point them to you. But one is to say, do you think that the administration is going to be able to declare something along the lines of a national emergency? And will the courts be able to stop that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we'll see if there is the, I guess, appetite to try to use yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's why we're so, this rhetoric of invasion, of the country being invaded, is so I think dangerous, is so kind of dehumanizing, because then you could just say like, well, does this warrant like a military response? And then of course then, or even justify more kind of just like militaristic kind of infrastructure at the border, which I think is also concerning as well. So I mean, yeah, whether or not the courts can step in, it's unclear. I know that Southern Poverty Law Center has said that we have our legal team that works on federal policy, and that we've yeah, I think it was on November 6th, we came out with a statement saying that we are willing to step in and try to block in by any way we can any kind of unjust executive actions or legislation that we see kind of coming out of the 119th Congress or the White House. And I know that there's a lot of other kind of human rights and civil rights groups that are standing by to challenge this as well. But so I know our legal team is standing by, but yeah, I guess it remains to be seen whether or not that Trump or kind of anyone else has the appetite to actually deploy kind of a military force to try to like stop this, or if it was just kind of all rhetoric that they were running on.
Thank you. We may have already addressed this, but Paul asked the question of what you have found to be some of the most persuasive facts and arguments to influence public opinion when talking about anti-immigration narratives.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that one thing then too is kind of uh underscoring where a lot of these kind of anti-immigrant narratives are coming from too. So kind of as I mentioned that yeah, these rhetoric and ideas did not kind of appear overnight. I mean, for decades, these groups have been trying to claim that there's an invasion, that we should not be having birthright citizenship in this country. So I think that it's important to yeah, just be aware of where a lot of these ideas are coming from, that they've been associated with these extremist groups for years, and saying that this is the same rhetoric that is being used by kind of everywhere from kind of like neo-Nazi groups are very like adamant and anti-immigrant, all the way to like more of these like kind of beltway leaning anti-immigrant groups as well, kind of use a lot of the same similar ideas. So yeah, just showing that a lot of these ideas just like are very much rooted in kind of extremist and white nationalist style thinking.
You brought up the 14th Amendment earlier in what you were saying, and I was thinking to myself, we've never repealed an amendment. We repealed one, and that was the Prohibition Amendment. I think it was 18, and 2 or 3 amendments later, we repealed it. But that's the only one of all the constitutional amendments that's ever been repealed. Do you think there's enough traction to repeal the 14th Amendment? And, I also looked up, it takes 2/3 of Congress to even put it on the ballot, and then three-fourths of the states. It takes a lot to repeal an amendment. What do you feel like the weather vane is saying on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it is like, again, these groups have pushed this for decades. So it sometimes is very hard to tell, like, what is just kind of red meat they're being thrown. They're trying to just like bolster kind of support, and kind of what is just kind of electoral rhetoric that's being thrown versus actual like um, ideas that people want to actualize and try to work and gain. So we saw this. We actually did see the birthright citizenship idea come up during the previous Trump administration, and it just never really gained steam. Never really got the legs that it needed to actually move on. But I will say that one thing that I think that that we saw with this last administration, and Jennifer, we were actually talking about this earlier on our call before we opened the session, was a lot of these kind of policies that they tried were kind of these testing grounds then too, and kind of like seeing how far they can push the limit and push the envelope with some of these kind of draconian and anti-inclusive policies. So yeah, whether I mean, I think that we saw that with like the Muslim ban. So it was like it came out as a full Muslim ban, and that it was just like went through the courts, and it was at the end it was a travel ban that still caused a nightmare, a headache for people trying to travel and come over to this country, but it eventually was somewhat watered down. So, but at the same time, then too, it's like have they learned from some of these mistakes, and have they kind of maybe now see an opportunity to kind of gain some of this political will to take up a huge task like birthright citizenship. I mean, it's hard to tell, but I feel also then too a lot of these groups like Stephen Miller, they've been just like almost like sitting there kind of seething during the Biden years. So I'm not sure kind of what their kind of first agenda items will be as they kind of come into it. So yeah, it's hard to tell, but again, we saw that a lot of these policies were tested, and of course then too, kind of whether or not there's not quite um, the not threat, but like the shadow of re-election. So whether or not these groups actually want to try to push this with the idea that they don't need to run Trump again for a third administration would also, I think, maybe factor into things.
Here's the thought. I don't see any other questions in the chat, Caleb. I think you've given us quite a lot of information and useful information to carry forth as we move into trying to think about together how we can be in solidarity with our neighbors. I will forecast for those of you on the screen today that our last session, fourth Monday of Advent next week, will be with Siembre, North Carolina, and Kelly Morales, who's one of the co-directors of Siembre, is going to move us to the next block. So some of the things that Caleb was talking about, blocking and building, Siembre has plans. They have things that they've done in the past that worked, and they would like to help us organize in our own communities to do some of the blocking and building that Caleb has referenced. So Kelly's going to talk about that next Monday. And then she's going to also forecast for us some training sessions that Siembre hopes to host and offer in the latter part of January after the inauguration, when we have a better idea of exactly what might happen. And those things will be offered in several different places across the state of North Carolina. So I invite you to join us next Monday to hear what Kelly has to say. And if you miss it, then of course we will archive it and put it on our YouTube channel so you can come back later. And then we'll be broadcasting after the first of the year any efforts that we hear about. So please let us know if you're doing things in your communities. We'd like to create a web of support for people across North Carolina who want to help, and then connect you with others who are helping, and also keep our connections alive with the immigrant population, since they indeed are the ones on the front grounds and know what help is needed. Okay, that's all I've got, Caleb.
All right, well, yeah, thank you so
Thank you for
much for
being with
inviting me.
us.
Yeah, it's great to be here with you all today. And yeah, I know I mentioned a lot of resources in my remarks, so I'll get those to you all,
Yep.
and you can forward them to anyone who might want to do some further reading about them.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll try to have all that turned around in the next 24 hours or so.
Great.
All right, friends, have a great week. Happy third week of Advent, the rejoicing week. Go and rejoice.